The whistle of the locomotive echoed through the empty Nevada desert as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the Eureka depot in hues of amber and gold. Sarah Newbury clutched her worn leather valise, eyes scanning the small platform for the fifth time that hour. No sign of the stagecoach that was supposed to carry her to her new life, no sign of anyone at all. The last passengers had long since departed, leaving her alone as shadows lengthened across the weathered wooden planks. The year was 1879, and Sarah had traveled over 1,000 miles on the promise of employment as a schoolteacher in this remote mining town. The letter had been specific. June 15th, arrival at 4 o'clock, transportation arranged. Yet here she stood, nearly 6 o'clock, with nothing but prairie wind and distant coyote calls to keep her company. "Station's closing up, miss," called the depot manager, jangling his keys impatiently. "Can't have you waiting inside all night. Town's 'bout half-mile that way." He gestured vaguely before disappearing into his office. Sarah felt her throat tighten. 22 years old, alone in a strange territory with night falling fast, this wasn't how she'd envisioned starting her new life. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders as heavily as her overstuffed carpetbag. "Appears someone's forgotten their manners," came a deep voice from behind her. Sarah turned to find a tall man leaning against a post, his features partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his riding clothes, suggesting he'd been on the trail for days. His posture was relaxed, but there was nothing casual about the intensity of his gaze. "Xavier Mackenzie," he said, straightening to his full height and touching the brim of his hat. "Folks call me Zav." His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin, took in her traveling suit and the small pile of luggage at her feet. "Seems to me you've been left stranded." Sarah lifted her chin, unwilling to appear as vulnerable as she felt. "I'm quite all right, sir. I'm certain there's just been a misunderstanding." The cowboy's lips quirked into a half-smile. "No misunderstanding I can see. No one came for you at the depot." He moved closer, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "Heading to Eureka, I reckon." "Yes," Sarah admitted, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher." Xavier Mackenzie nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down on the bench beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. "I will be your answer," he said simply. "I beg your pardon." Sarah drew back slightly. "I've got a wagon and 2 strong horses," he explained, gesturing to where a covered wagon stood at the edge of the station yard. "I'm heading into town myself. I can take you where you need to go." Sarah hesitated, years of propriety warring with her present predicament. "It wouldn't be proper to, miss," he interrupted gently. "The sun's setting, and it's 15 miles to town. There won't be another train till Thursday, and this station ain't the place for a lady to spend the night." He rose to his feet, towering above her. "I promise you'll arrive safely, reputation intact. You can ride up front with me or in the back with my supplies. Your choice." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a cold desert night. Sarah glanced at the darkening sky, then back at the stranger whose eyes held nothing but steady reassurance. "Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie," she said finally, gathering her courage along with her bags. "I would appreciate the ride." Xavier lifted her trunk with ease. "Just doing what any decent man would," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true in these parts. As he loaded her belongings into the wagon, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if this chance encounter was merely good fortune or something more. Either way, as the depot disappeared behind them and the vast Nevada landscape opened before them, she felt the first stirrings of hope since stepping off the train. The wheels creaked beneath them as Xavier guided the horses along the rutted trail. The distant silhouette of mountains created a jagged horizon against the deepening purple sky, stars beginning to glimmer overhead. Sarah sat beside him on the wooden bench, maintaining a proper distance, despite the occasional jolt that threatened to send her sliding against his solid frame. "So, miss?" Xavier let the question hang. "Newbury, Sarah Newbury," she supplied, adjusting her bonnet that had been loosened by the bumpy ride. "Miss Newbury, what brings a lady like yourself all the way from—" He paused, giving her a sidelong glance. "Boston," she filled in. "Boston," he repeated with a low whistle. "That's quite a journey. Must have been something mighty important to pull you clear across the country." Sarah watched the landscape roll by, considering her answer. "I wanted something different, something real." The words tumbled out before she could filter them into something more proper. Xavier's hands remained steady on the reins, but his attention was fully on her now. "Most folks come west for gold or land. Not many come looking for real. I've spent my whole life in drawing rooms and lecture halls," Sarah explained, surprising herself with her candor. "I've read about places like this, about people building something from nothing. I wanted to contribute to teach children who truly need education." "Noble cause," Xavier acknowledged. "Though I should warn you, Yreka's a mining town with all that entails. Rough men, rougher language, and a fair share of trouble. School's been empty since the last teacher headed back east last winter." Sarah straightened her spine. "I'm more resilient than I appear, Mr. Mackenzie." His lips curved slightly. "Never said you weren't, Miss Newbury." The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, causing Sarah to grab the bench for stability. Xavier's hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. Even through the fabric of her sleeve, his touch felt solid and warm. He withdrew it quickly, returning to the reins. "What about you?" Sarah asked, eager to shift attention away from her momentary vulnerability. "What's your purpose in Yreka?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "I run cattle on a ranch outside town, just returning from delivering a herd to the railroad in Reno." Something in his tone suggested there was more, but Sarah didn't press. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, filled instead with the creaking of wood, the rhythmic clop of hooves, and the whispering of the desert wind. "There should have been someone to meet you," Xavier said after a while, his voice carrying a note of disapproval. "Town council hired you, didn't they?" Sarah nodded. "Mayor Hollister arranged everything through correspondence. The letter said the stage coach would collect me." Xavier made a sound halfway between a chuckle and a grunt. "Hollister's a busy man, too busy for his own good sometimes." "Stage probably broke an axle. Happens more than folks would like to admit out here." A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. Sarah shivered involuntarily. "Cold?" Xavier asked, already shrugging out of his coat before she could answer. "No, she began, but he had already draped the weathered leather jacket around her shoulders. It carried the scent of horse, leather oil, and something distinctly masculine. "Thank you," she amended, drawing it closer despite herself. "We've still got about an hour's ride," he informed her. "Might as well get comfortable." As they continued their journey through the gathering darkness, Sarah found herself stealing glances at her unexpected rescuer. In the moonlight, his profile was strong jaw set with determination, eyes alert to every shadow and sound. His hands, though calloused and work-hardened, handled the reins with a gentle confidence that spoke of years of experience. Xavier Mackenzie was nothing like the gentleman she'd known back east. There was no artifice about him, no carefully constructed facade. He simply was who he was, a man of the frontier, shaped by its harshness and its beauty alike. "Tell me about the children I'll be teaching," Sarah requested, genuinely curious. Xavier's expression softened. Good kids, mostly. Miners' children, shopkeepers' little ones, a few from the ranches outside town. Some have never had proper schooling, others had a bit before the last teacher left. He glanced at her. They need someone who won't give up on them at the first sign of trouble. The implication was clear. He was questioning whether she would stay the course or flee back east like her predecessor. I didn't come all this way to turn around at the first challenge, Sarah assured him, her voice firm. For the first time, Xavier's smile reached his eyes, creating crinkles at the corners. We'll see, Boston, he said, the nickname sliding easily from his lips. We'll see. As the wagon crested a hill, lights appeared in the distance, first just a few pinpricks against the darkness, then more, until the entire valley below twinkled with the promise of civilization. There she is, Xavier announced. Eureka. Not much to look at compared to your Boston, but she's got spirit. Sarah leaned forward, taking in the sight of what would be her home. From this distance, the mining town looked almost magical, its lights reflecting the stars above. Reality might be harsher in daylight, but in this moment it was everything she'd hoped for. It's beautiful, she whispered. Xavier gave her a curious look, as if seeing her anew. Suppose it is, through fresh eyes. As they descended toward the town, Sarah felt a curious mixture of apprehension and excitement. Whatever awaited her in Eureka, she sensed that meeting Xavier Mackenzie had somehow changed the course of what was to come. She just didn't know how right she was. The wagon rolled down Eureka's main street, past saloons still bustling with activity despite the late hour. Piano music spilled from open doors along with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Men in dusty clothes and mud-caked boots gathered in clusters on the wooden sidewalks, their conversations quieting briefly as they noticed Sarah riding beside Xavier. Don't mind them, Xavier advised quietly. New faces are rare enough, but a lady like yourself is practically an event. Sarah kept her posture straight, acutely aware of being observed. I suppose I'll need to get used to it. They'll lose interest once the novelty wears off, he assured her. Just give it time. They passed the general store, closed for the evening, the sheriff's office, lamps still burning inside, and the Silver Dollar Saloon doing the liveliest business on the street, before pulling up in front of a 2-story building with a freshly painted sign. Eureka Hotel. Best accommodations in town, Xavier announced, setting the brake. Not saying much, but the sheets are clean and the locks work. Sarah hesitated. I was told there would be housing arranged. Xavier jumped down from the wagon and came around to her side. Mayor probably assumed you'd stay here until proper arrangements could be made. He offered his hand to help her down. Town council meets tomorrow morning. We can get things sorted then. His hand was warm and solid as she placed her fingers in his palm. The simple contact sent an unexpected tingle up her arm as he guided her safely to the ground. I'll see to your bags, he said, releasing her hand perhaps a moment longer than necessary. The hotel lobby was small but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in the corner and a worn settee against one wall. A balding man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his ledger as they entered. Evening, Johnson, Xavier greeted the clerk. Miss Newbury here is the new schoolteacher. Needs a room for the night. Johnson adjusted his glasses, peering at Sarah with open curiosity. Schoolteacher, eh? Wasn't expecting you till tomorrow. The letter clearly stated today's date, Sarah corrected politely but firmly. The clerk shrugged. Mayor's been in Carson City all week, probably got his dates mixed up. He turned a large book toward her. Sign here, please. Room's $2 a night. Includes breakfast. Sarah reached for her reticule, only to realize with horror that her travel money was nearly depleted after the unexpected expenses along her journey. $2 would leave her with precious little until her first salary payment. Xavier seemed to read the calculation in her expression. He placed $3 silver on the counter. "That'll cover tonight and tomorrow with something for dinner." "Mr. Mackenzie, I couldn't possibly," Sarah protested. "Consider it the town's welcome," he interrupted smoothly. "I'll add it to what the council owes you for the miscommunication." Before she could argue further, Johnson handed her a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs. Basin and pitcher are filled. Outhouse is out back." His eyes flicked between her and Xavier, clearly wondering about their relationship. Xavier brought in her trunk and carpetbag, setting them just inside the doorway of a small but clean room furnished with a narrow bed, washstand, and simple dresser. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, lingering at the threshold, hat now in his hands. "If you're agreeable, I can come by around 9 tomorrow to escort you to the town council meeting." Sarah stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how far she was from everything familiar, how dependent she'd become on this stranger's kindness in the span of just a few hours. "That would be most appreciated," she said. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Mr. Mackenzie, thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps, or something warmer. "Get some rest, Miss Newbury. Erica will look different in the morning light." He settled his hat back on his head. "Whether better or worse, I'll let you decide tomorrow." With a slight bow, he departed, his footsteps receding down the hallway. Sarah closed the door and turned the key in the lock, leaning against the solid wood. Exhaustion washed over her as the events of the day caught up with her. She traveled nearly 2,000 miles to teach in a frontier town, only to be forgotten at the station and rescued by a cowboy who now occupied far too many of her thoughts. She moved to the window and parted the thin curtains. On the street below, Xavier was climbing onto the wagon seat. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up at her window. Even from this distance, their eyes met. He touched the brim of his hat in a silent salute before flicking the reins and guiding the wagon down the street. Sarah watched until he disappeared from sight, wondering what tomorrow would bring in this strange new world where she'd already broken half a dozen rules of propriety in a single evening. Whatever it was, she suspected Xavier Mackenzie would somehow be part of it. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the early bustle of a town coming to life. Sarah dressed carefully in her most professional attire, a navy blue skirt and matching jacket over a crisp white shirtwaist. She pinned her honey brown hair into a tight bun, determined to make a respectable impression on the town council. The hotel dining room offered a simple but hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Sarah ate alone, ignoring the curious glances from the handful of male patrons. Precisely at 9, the bell above the hotel door jingled and Xavier stepped inside. He transformed from the trail-worn cowboy of yesterday. Clean-shaven, dressed in a pressed white shirt and dark waistcoat, with his boots polished to a respectable shine, he looked almost like a different man. Almost except for those same intense blue eyes that had first captured her attention. "Morning, Miss Newbury," he greeted, hat in hand. "Hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," she replied, rising from the table. In truth, she'd tossed and turned much of the night, her mind racing with doubts and questions about her decision to come west. Xavier offered his arm. "Town hall's just down the street. Mayor Hollister returned late last night, so the council's assembled and waiting." Sarah hesitated before placing her gloved hand on his forearm. The wool of his coat felt rough beneath her fingers, but his arm was solid and reassuring. Outside, Erica presented a different face in daylight. The dusty Main Street bustled with activity freight wagons delivering goods to the stores, miners heading to the hills, women shopping and gossiping in small groups. The surrounding mountains rose majestic and imposing against a cloudless blue sky, making the town seem even smaller and more vulnerable than it had appeared at night. As they walked, several people called out greetings to Xavier, who responded with easy familiarity. More than a few gazes lingered on Sarah, some merely curious, others openly appraising. "Mr. Mackenzie seems well known," she observed. "Xav," he corrected. "And yes, I've been in these parts longer than most. My ranch supplies beef to most of the businesses in town." Sarah absorbed this information, revising her impression of him. Not just a cowboy, then, but a successful rancher, a man of some standing in the community. The town hall was a two-story wooden structure with pretensions of grandeur in its columned entrance and large windows. Inside, 5 men sat around a large table, their conversation halting as Sarah and Xavier entered. A portly, red-faced man with an impressive mustache rose to his feet. "Miss Newbury, I presume? Mayor Gerald Hollister at your service." He bustled forward, hand extended. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for the mix-up yesterday. I was in Carson City on urgent business, and the stage-coach schedule was apparently disrupted by a washout on the Eastern Road." Sarah shook his hand, maintaining her composure. "It's fortunate that Mr. Mackenzie happened to be at the depot." Hollister glanced at Xavier, something unreadable passing between them. "Yes, most fortunate indeed. Please sit down. Allow me to introduce the council." The introductions proceeded quickly. Joseph Peterson, the town's banker; William Foster, who owned the general store; Thomas Grayson, the owner of the largest mine in the area; and Daniel Burke, the local doctor. Each man nodded politely, their expressions ranging from genuine welcome to guarded assessment. "Gentlemen," Hollister continued once they were all seated, "Miss Newbury comes highly recommended from Boston, with excellent credentials from the Massachusetts Teachers College." "Mighty far from home," observed Foster, stroking his beard. "What brings a refined lady like yourself to our humble establishment?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I believe education is vital to the future of this country, Mr. Foster. The children here deserve the same opportunities as those in eastern cities." "Noble sentiment," Dr. Burke commented, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "But I feel I should warn you that our previous teacher found conditions here rather challenging." "Miss Fairchild was expecting something rather different," Xavier added, speaking for the first time since entering the room. He'd positioned himself slightly behind Sarah's chair, a quiet presence that somehow made her feel more confident. "Miss Newbury strikes me as being made of sterner stuff." Sarah felt a flush of pleasure at his assessment. "I assure you, gentlemen, I'm well aware that frontier life presents difficulties. I'm prepared to face them." Grayson, the mine owner, leaned forward. "School's been closed for months now. Building needs work, supplies are limited, and some of these children have never seen the inside of a classroom." His tone was challenging rather than discouraging. "Then I shall have the privilege of introducing them to the joys of learning," Sarah replied evenly, meeting his gaze. A brief smile crossed Xavier's face, visible only to Grayson, who sat opposite Sarah. Something in the mine owner's expression shifted. "Well, I like your spirit," Grayson declared. "God knows we need someone with backbone to wrangle those young uns." Mayor Hollister cleared his throat. "Yes, well, there's the matter of your accommodations to discuss. The schoolhouse has a small attached living quarters that previous teachers have utilized. It's modest but private. However, it requires some repairs before it's habitable." "What kind of repairs?" Xavier asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Peterson, the banker, shuffled some papers. Roof leaks in 3 places, stove needs replacing, and there's a family of raccoons that's taken up residence in the attic. So where exactly is Miss Newbury supposed to stay in the meantime? Xavier pressed. The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Well, the hotel, naturally, Hollister blustered. For a few weeks, until repairs are completed. At the town's expense, I presume, Xavier added, his voice pleasant but firm. After more discussion and some reluctant agreement from the council about covering her temporary housing and making the necessary repairs, Sarah found herself walking out of town hall with a signed contract, a set of school keys, and an appointment to inspect the schoolhouse that afternoon. "That went better than expected," she remarked to Xavier as they descended the town hall steps. "Hollister likes to hear himself talk, but he means well," Xavier replied, settling his hat on his head. Peterson counts every penny twice, Grayson's suspicious of outsiders, Foster's concerned about propriety, and Burke's the only one with consistent good sense. Sarah laughed despite herself. "You've summarized them perfectly." Xavier's expression softened at her laughter. "Are you hungry?" Emily's cafe does a decent midday meal. The invitation took her by surprise. Proper etiquette dictated she should decline. She barely knew this man, after all. But nothing about her situation was proper by Boston standards, and her stomach chose that moment to remind her that breakfast had been hours ago. That would be lovely, she accepted. Emily's cafe was a small establishment tucked between the hardware store and the dressmaker's shop. Inside, checkered cloths covered simple wooden tables, and the aroma of fresh bread and stew filled the air. A plump woman with rosy cheeks greeted Xavier with obvious affection. "Xavier Mackenzie, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town 2 days running in months." Her curious gaze shifted to Sarah. "Emily, this is Miss Sarah Newbury, our new schoolteacher," Xavier introduced them. "Miss Newbury, Emily Wilson makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi." Emily beamed. "Welcome to Eureka, Miss Newbury. My Jimmy will be one of your students, 9 years old and smart as a whip, though he'd rather be fishing than reading most days." Sarah smiled genuinely. "I look forward to meeting him, Mrs. Wilson. Just Emily, dear." "We don't stand on ceremony much here," she replied, leading them to a table by the window. "Special today is beef stew with dumplings." After they ordered, an awkward silence fell. Sarah realized this was the first time she'd shared a meal alone with a man who wasn't a relative. In Boston, such an action would have sparked immediate scandal. "Something troubling you?" Xavier asked, his perceptiveness unsettling. Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "Where I come from, this," she gestured between them, "would be considered highly improper." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, a single lady dining with an unrelated gentleman, precisely." Xavier leaned back in his chair, considering her. "Miss Newbury, you'll find that frontier towns have their own code of conduct. Some rules are stricter. A man's word is his bond. Theft is often punished more harshly than back east. Other rules, well, they bend out of necessity." He paused as Emily brought 2 cups of coffee. "That said, if you're uncomfortable, I understand completely." Sarah wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "It's not discomfort exactly. More adjustment. Everything here is so different. Different doesn't always mean wrong," he observed quietly. Their food arrived before Sarah could respond. Hearty bowls of stew with dumplings floating on top, and thick slices of fresh bread on the side. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Sarah surprised by how ravenous she suddenly felt. "Tell me about your ranch," she requested. genuinely curious about this man who'd become her unexpected guide. Xavier's face lit up with unmistakable pride. 500 acres along the McCloud River. Started with just 50 head of cattle and a broken-down cabin 10 years ago. He took a sip of coffee. Now we run over 300 head, have 6 good hands working year-round, and the main house is nearly finished. Sarah inquired, suddenly wondering if there was a Mrs. Mackenzie waiting at home. My foreman, Luke, and the ranch hands, Xavier clarified, seeming to read her thoughts. No wife, if that's what you're asking. Sarah blushed furiously. I wasn't. It's a natural question, he assured her, amusement dancing in his eyes. And no, I've never been married. Eager to change the subject, Sarah asked, what brought you to Eureka originally? Something shadowed Xavier's expression briefly. War ended. Couldn't go home to Texas. Headed west instead. His clipped sentences suggested more to the story than he was willing to share. Sarah nodded, not pressing further. Many men had sought new beginnings in the West after the Civil War, their old lives destroyed or too painful to return to. And you, Xavier asked, what really brings a Boston lady to the wilds of California? There must be schools needing teachers back east without requiring such a journey. Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. My father died last year, she said softly. He was a professor of literature at Harvard. My mother passed when I was 12. There was nothing keeping me in Boston except memories and expectations. Expectations, Xavier prompted gently, to marry well, to be the perfect society wife. Sarah smiled ruefully. I was engaged, briefly, to a colleague of my father's. Professor Hamilton was perfectly respectable, comfortably established, and utterly predictable. What happened? He informed me that once we were married, I would naturally give up my teaching nonsense and dedicate myself to running his household. Sarah met Xavier's gaze directly. I returned his ring the next day. Xavier's laugh was unexpected, warm, and genuine. Good for you, Boston. My aunt was scandalized, society was shocked, and Sarah took a deep breath. I felt free for the first time in years. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Sarah had the disorienting sensation that Xavier Mackenzie truly saw her in a way no one in Boston ever had. Emily appeared at their table, breaking the moment. Pie's just out of the oven. Can I tempt you? By the time they finished their meal and stepped back onto the street, Sarah felt more at ease in Xavier's company. There was something refreshingly straightforward about him. He said what he meant, and seemed to have no agenda beyond helping her settle into Eureka. Shall we go see your school? He suggested, gesturing down the street. They walked together, Xavier pointing out various establishments and introducing Sarah to several townspeople they encountered. Everyone seemed to know him, treating him with a respect that suggested his position in the community was well established. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with an adjacent smaller structure that would be her living quarters. As Xavier produced the key and unlocked the door, Sarah braced herself for what she might find. The interior was dusty and neglected, with rows of desks in disarray and a blackboard that hadn't been cleaned in months. Yet, despite the cobwebs and scattered debris, Sarah could see the potential. Large windows would provide good light. The wood stove in the corner, once cleaned, would keep the space warm in winter, and there was ample wall space for maps and educational charts. What do you think? Xavier asked, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah walked to the teacher's desk at the front of the room, running her fingers along its worn surface. It needs work, she acknowledged, but it has good bones. Xavier smiled at her assessment, like most things out here. They checked the living quarters next to small kitchen, bedroom, and sitting room. The roof damage was evident from the water stains on the ceiling, and the cookstove was indeed rusted beyond safe use. But the bedroom was dry, and the windows all had intact glass. "It's going to take at least 2 weeks to make this properly habitable," Xavier estimated, frowning at a particularly large water stain. "Maybe longer if we can't get the materials quickly." Sarah queried. "The town," Xavier amended, though something in his tone suggested he personally intended to ensure the work was done properly. "In the meantime, we should get you settled at the hotel." As they walked back toward town, Sarah found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd been abandoned at a train station in a strange territory. Now, she had employment, temporary housing, and an unexpected ally in Xavier Mackenzie. "You've been extraordinarily kind to a complete stranger, Mr. Mackenzie," she said as they approached the hotel. "I'm not sure how to properly thank you, Xav," he reminded her. "And no thanks necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Sarah countered softly. Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her directly. The afternoon sunlight caught the gold flecks in his blue eyes, making them almost luminous against his tanned skin. "Perhaps not," he conceded, "but helping you has been no hardship, Miss Newbury." Something in his tone made her heart beat a little faster. "Sarah," she offered. "If I'm to call you Xav, then you must call me Sarah." A smile slowly spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "Sarah," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'll come by tomorrow morning if you'd like. Help you get started on cleaning up the schoolhouse." "Don't you have a ranch to run?" she asked, suddenly conscious that he must have responsibilities beyond escorting a new schoolteacher around town. "Luke can manage things for another day or two," Xavier replied. "And I'm curious to see what you make of our little school." Sarah should have politely declined. A proper Boston lady would never accept so much assistance from a man she barely knew. But as she was rapidly discovering, Eureka operated by different rules, and she wasn't entirely the proper Boston lady she'd been raised to be. "I would appreciate the help," she admitted, "though I don't want to impose on your time." "It's freely given," he assured her. As they parted at the hotel entrance, Sarah couldn't help wondering what her former fiancé would think of Xavier Mackenzie, a man as different from Professor Hamilton as the wild mountains of California were from the manicured gardens of Boston Common. More importantly, she wondered why that thought made her smile. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Xavier arrived early the morning after their tour of the schoolhouse, wearing work clothes and accompanied by 2 of his ranch hands. They spent the day clearing debris, washing windows and scrubbing floors, while Sarah organized what limited supplies remained from the previous teacher. Word spread quickly through town that the new schoolteacher was hard at work preparing for classes, and volunteers began to appear. Mrs. Wilson from the cafe brought lunch for the workers and stayed to help clean blackboards. Mr. Foster sent over chalk, paper, and primers from the general store on credit until your first paycheck. Dr. Burke's wife delivered a box of books that had belonged to their grown children. Even Thomas Grayson, the initially skeptical mine owner, contributed by sending 3 of his workers to start repairs on the teacher's quarters roof. Sarah found herself in the center of a community effort that both surprised and touched her. In Boston, she'd been one small part of a vast, impersonal city. Here in Eureka, within days of her arrival, she was already connected to the town in ways she'd never anticipated. Throughout it all, Xavier was a constant presence, arranging for materials, coordinating volunteers, and working alongside everyone else without hesitation. Sarah learned more about him through his interactions with others than from anything he said directly. She saw how children trusted him instantly, how men respected his judgment, and how the town's women regarded him with varying degrees of interest that made Sarah feel an unexpected twinge of something she wasn't prepared to name. "School's looking better," Xavier commented one evening as they stood in the doorway, surveying the transformed classroom. The floors gleamed with fresh soap and water. Desks had been arranged in neat rows and educational charts now hung on the walls. "You've worked miracles in a week." "Not me," Sarah corrected. "Everyone. I've never experienced such community spirit." Xavier leaned against the doorframe, his shirt sleeves rolled up to expose forearms bronzed by the sun. "Frontier towns survive by pulling together. Nobody makes it out here alone." "I'm beginning to understand that," Sarah admitted. She'd spent the day working alongside women who would have scandalized her Boston acquaintances with their pragmatic discussions of everything from childbirth to handling drunken husbands. Yet they'd welcomed her without judgment, offering practical advice about desert living and the quirks of Eureka's various families. "Mayor says the stove for your quarters will arrive on Monday's freight wagon," Xavier informed her. "Once that's installed and the roof's finished, you should be able to move in." "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied, though she felt an unexpected pang at the thought that Xavier's assistance would soon become unnecessary. Over the past week, she'd grown accustomed to his presence, to their conversations that ranged from literature. He was surprisingly well-read, to local history, to debates about teaching methods. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier added, "Of course, you'll still need help setting up your quarters, getting firewood delivered, that sort of thing." Sarah smiled. "Are you volunteering, Mr. Mackenzie?" "Always glad to be of service, Miss Newbury," he replied, his tone light but his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their exchange. A rider appeared in the schoolyard, a tall, lean man with a weather-beaten face who sat his horse with the ease of someone born to the saddle. "Luke," Xavier called out in greeting. "Something wrong at the ranch?" "Nothing urgent," the man replied, swinging down from his mount. "But Miller's threatening to pull out of our beef contract unless you meet with him personally." He tipped his hat respectfully to Sarah. "Madam," Xavier frowned, "Miller's always complaining about something." He turned to Sarah. "I'm afraid I need to head back to the ranch for a couple of days." "Will you be all right here?" "Of course," she assured him, ignoring the flicker of disappointment she felt. "I have plenty to keep me occupied and everyone's been very helpful." Xavier hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave. "Mrs. Wilson knows to check in on you, and Sheriff Dawson is aware you're staying at the hotel alone." "I'm perfectly capable of managing for a few days," Sarah said, amused by his concern. "I did travel across the country by myself, after all." "That you did, Boston," Xavier acknowledged with a slight smile. "I'll be back by Saturday at the latest." He turned to Luke. "Let's head out now. We can make it to the north pasture before dark." As the two men mounted their horses, Xavier paused, looking back at Sarah. "School opens Monday." She nodded. "Mayor Hollister is spreading the word. We're expecting 15 to 20 children to start." "You'll do fine," he said with such conviction that Sarah couldn't help but believe him. She watched them ride away, Xavier's straight-backed figure gradually disappearing into the distance. Only when they were completely out of sight did she acknowledge the strange emptiness their departure left behind. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah continued working on the schoolhouse, posted announcements about registration, and prepared lessons for students whose ages and abilities she could only guess at. In the evenings, she dined at Emily's cafe, gradually becoming acquainted with the townspeople who would entrust their children to her care. By Saturday afternoon, the school was as ready as she could make it, and Sarah found herself with unexpected free time. She decided to explore the town more thoroughly, walking past the church where she'd attended services the previous Sunday, the small lending library operated part-time by the minister's wife, and the various shops that served the community's needs. As she passed the Silver Dollar Saloon, the door swung open, disgorging a group of miners still dusty from their shifts. Their boisterous conversation halted abruptly when they noticed Sarah, hands reaching automatically for hats that were hastily removed. "Afternoon, Miss Newbury," one called out respectfully. "My boy Tommy's all set to start school Monday, won't stop talking about it." "I look forward to meeting him, Mr." Sarah replied, pausing on the boardwalk. "Jenkins, madam, Amos Jenkins." He shuffled his feet, suddenly aware of his grimy appearance. "Tommy's mama passed 2 winters back. Been doing my best, but he needs proper learning." "Every child does, Mr. Jenkins," Sarah assured him, "and I promise to do my utmost for Tommy." As the miners continued on their way, Sarah heard the sound of a piano from inside the saloon, someone playing a familiar tune with surprising skill. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she peered through the swinging doors. The saloon's interior was dim after the bright sunshine outside. A long bar ran along one wall, tables scattered throughout the room, and in the corner, a piano where a gray-haired man coaxed a melancholy rendition of "Beautiful Dreamer" from worn keys. "Not the sort of establishment for a lady like yourself," came a female voice from beside her. Sarah turned to find a woman regarding her with frank assessment. She was perhaps 30, dressed in a fashionable if somewhat flashy burgundy gown, her dark hair elaborately styled. Despite the early hour, she wore full evening makeup, complete with rouged cheeks and darkened lashes. "I was just listening to the music," Sarah explained, embarrassed to be caught gawking. The woman smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. "Old Pete plays beautifully, doesn't he? Used to perform in San Francisco before drink got the better of him." She extended a gloved hand. "Ruby Daniels. I run the Silver Dollar." Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "Sarah Newbury, the new school teacher." Ruby's eyebrows rose. "Brave of you to acknowledge me publicly, Miss Newbury. Most respectable ladies in town cross the street when they see me coming." There was no missing the irony in her tone. Sarah sensed a test being administered and chose her response carefully. "I've learned that frontier towns have different standards than Boston drawing rooms, Miss Daniels, and I try not to judge people before I know them." Ruby studied her for a moment, then laughed a rich, genuine sound. "Xavier said you were different. I see he was right." "You know Xavier?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Everyone knows Xavier," Ruby replied with a cryptic smile. "His cattle feed half the county, and his opinion carries weight with the town council." She tilted her head. "But yes, we're acquainted. He's a good man, one of the few who treats my girls with respect regardless of their profession." Before Sarah could process this information, Ruby continued, "I should warn you, though plenty of ladies have set their caps for Xavier Mackenzie over the years, none have succeeded in catching him yet." "I have no intention of catching anyone," Sarah protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Mackenzie has simply been kind enough to help me get established in Eureka." Ruby's knowing look suggested she wasn't convinced. "Well, if you need anything, advice, help with troublesome parents, or just a place where you can speak freely without the town gossips measuring every word, my door is always open to you." The offer was unexpected but seemed genuinely meant. "Thank you, Miss Daniels. I appreciate that." Ruby glanced over Sarah's shoulder. "And speaking of your helpful cowboy." Sarah turned to see Xavier riding down the street, his familiar figure a welcome sight after 3 days' absence. He spotted her immediately, his expression shifting from surprise to pleasure as he guided his horse toward where she stood with Ruby. "Ladies," he greeted them, dismounting smoothly. "An unexpected pairing." Ruby smirked. "Just welcoming the new schoolteacher to town, Xavier. Don't worry, I didn't corrupt her with tales of your misspent youth." Xavier's laugh suggested an ease between them that hinted at a long acquaintance. "There's not much to tell, and you know it." "More's the pity," Ruby retorted good-naturedly. "A man with your looks should have better stories." She winked at Sarah. "Remember my offer, Miss Newbury, any time." With that, she swept back into the saloon, leaving Sarah and Xavier alone on the boardwalk. "Making new friends, I see," Xavier commented, his tone carefully neutral. "Miss Daniels seems forthright," Sarah replied, unsure how to navigate this conversation. Xavier's mouth quirked. "That's one way to put it. Ruby's had a hard life, but she runs a clean establishment and looks after her girls better than most in her position." He changed the subject. "How have things been while I was away?" As they walked together toward the hotel, Sarah filled him in on the week's progress. Xavier listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her plans for the school. "The stove was installed yesterday," he informed her. "And the roof repairs are complete. Your quarters should be ready for you to move in tomorrow if you'd like." "That's wonderful news," Sarah exclaimed. "The hotel has been comfortable, but I'm eager to have my own space." "I thought you might be," Xavier replied. "I've brought my wagon into town. If you're agreeable, I can help you move your things in the morning." Sarah nodded, feeling an odd mixture of excitement and nervousness at the prospect of establishing her own home in Eureka. "That would be most helpful, thank you." They reached the hotel, pausing at the entrance. Xavier seemed reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you?" he began, then stopped himself, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "That is, I wondered if you might join me for dinner at Emily's, to celebrate your imminent move and the opening of school." The invitation shouldn't have made Sarah's heart beat faster, but it did. "I'd like that very much," she heard herself say. Xavier's smile was worth any impropriety the town gossips might assign to their dinner. "I'll call for you at 6 then." As Sarah watched him lead his horse toward the livery stable, she found herself wondering about Ruby Daniels' comment regarding the ladies who had set their caps for Xavier Mackenzie. It wasn't her business, of course, and she certainly wasn't among their number. She was simply grateful for his friendship in a strange town. At least, that's what she told herself as she spent an unusually long time selecting her dress for dinner. The evening at Emily's cafe was unlike any dining experience Sarah had known in Boston. The food was simple but delicious, the atmosphere relaxed, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Xavier told her stories of his early days in Eureka, when the town was little more than a collection of tents and crude cabins. Sarah shared anecdotes from her teaching experiences back east, making him laugh with tales of precocious students and stuffy school administrators. "You never did say how you ended up in Eureka specifically," Sarah noted as they lingered over apple pie. "Of all the places in the West, why here?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, his expression turning reflective. "After the war, I drifted for a while. Worked cattle drives in Texas, tried my hand at mining in Colorado, even spent a season on a fishing boat out of San Francisco." He traced patterns on the tablecloth with his finger. "Nothing felt right until I came through this valley. Something about the mountains, the river, it spoke to me, said this is where you belong." "So you stayed," Sarah prompted when he fell silent. "So I stayed. Worked for other ranches at first, saved every penny." When the Hollister property came up for sale, old Gerald's father was ready to retire. I had just enough for a down payment. A smile touched his lips. The bank thought I was crazy. Young, single man with no family backing, taking on that much debt. But I knew what the land could be. And now your ranch is one of the most successful in the county, Sarah finished for him, having heard others in town refer to the Mackenzie ranch with respect. It's been a good life, Xavier acknowledged. Demanding, sometimes lonely, but good. His gaze met hers. And you? Will teaching in Eureka be good enough after Boston? The question held weight beyond its simple wording. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Boston was where I grew up, where I was educated, where I learned who I was supposed to be, she said slowly. But I never felt I truly belonged there. The constraints, the expectations, they were suffocating. She looked around the small cafe at the mix of miners, shopkeepers, and ranchers enjoying their meals. I've been in Eureka barely a week, and I've already felt more purposeful, more useful than I did in years back east. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West isn't perfect. It's harsh, sometimes violent, often unjust, especially to those who don't look like most of us in this room. His gaze drifted briefly to a corner table where a Chinese man ate alone, ignored by the other patrons. But there's a freedom here to become whatever you're capable of becoming, without centuries of tradition dictating your path. That's exactly it, Sarah agreed, surprised and pleased by his insight. I want to build something meaningful, something that's truly mine. Teaching these children, helping shape this community's future. That matters more than all the drawing room conversations in Boston. Their eyes held across the table, and Sarah had the disorienting sensation that Xavier Mackenzie understood her better after a week of acquaintance than Professor Hamilton had after 2 years of courtship. To new beginnings, Xavier said softly, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To new beginnings, Sarah echoed, touching her cup to his. As they walked back to the hotel in the gathering twilight, their conversation turned to practical matters: the moving of her belongings in the morning, supplies she might need for her new quarters, her plans for the first day of school. At the hotel entrance, Xavier paused. I'll be by with the wagon at 9 tomorrow if that suits you. Perfect, Sarah replied, suddenly awkward in a way she hadn't been during dinner. In Boston, a gentleman caller would bow formally over her hand. Here in Eureka, she wasn't sure what the proper farewell might be. Xavier solved the dilemma by tipping his hat. Good night, Sarah. Sleep well. Good night, Xav, she replied, the shortened name still feeling new on her tongue. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Sarah acknowledged that Xavier Mackenzie was becoming far more important to her than a mere friendly guide to frontier life. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of approaching autumn. Sarah packed her belongings efficiently, her small collection of possessions a testament to how far she'd traveled from her previous life. Xavier arrived precisely at 9, his wagon clean and lined with fresh straw to protect her trunk. Together, they loaded her possessions, Xavier handling the heavier items while Sarah secured smaller bundles and bags. Ready? He asked when the last item was safely stowed. Sarah glanced back at the hotel that had been her temporary home. Ready, she confirmed. The journey to the schoolhouse took only minutes. As the wagon pulled up beside the teacher's quarters, Sarah was surprised to see smoke rising from the chimney. Emily came by earlier to start a fire in your stove, Xavier explained, noting her confusion. Wanted to make sure the place was warm for your arrival. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought a lump to Sarah's throat. Everyone has been so kind. You're important to the town, Xavier said simply. A good teacher means a future for our children. He helped her unload her belongings, carrying her trunk into the bedroom while Sarah began arranging her books and personal items in the sitting room. The quarters were modest 2 small rooms plus the kitchen, but the floors had been freshly scrubbed, curtains hung at the windows, and a colorful rag rug covered the sitting room floor. Mrs. Burke brought over some extra linens yesterday, Xavier informed her, gesturing to a neatly folded stack on a chair. And Emily said she'd be by later with a basket of provisions to get you started. Sarah stood in the center of the sitting room, taking it all in. It's perfect, she said softly. It's small, Xavier countered. It's mine, Sarah replied with a smile. My very own home. Something in her tone made Xavier study her more closely. You never had your own place in Boston, Sarah shook her head. I lived in my father's house, then in a teacher's boarding house after he passed. Always someone else's rules, someone else's space. Xavier's expression softened with understanding. Then welcome home, Sarah Newbury. The words, simple as they were, filled her with unexpected emotion. Sarah busied herself arranging books on a shelf, blinking rapidly to dispel the moisture that had gathered in her eyes. They spent the next hour organizing her belongings, Xavier hanging a small shelf in the kitchen for her dishes and showing her how to operate the new stove properly. Their movements around the small space soon developed an easy rhythm, as if they'd done this dance many times before. When the last item was put away, Xavier built up the fire in the sitting room stove while Sarah brewed tea in the kitchen. They sat together on the small settee, enjoying the hot drinks and the satisfaction of a job well completed. Nervous about tomorrow? Xavier asked. Sarah considered the question. A little, she admitted. I've taught before, but never such a wide range of ages and abilities in one classroom. You'll manage brilliantly, he said with such certainty that Sarah almost believed him. How can you be so sure? You hardly know me. Xavier's gaze was steady. I've watched you this past week. You're determined, adaptable, and genuinely care about doing this right. Those qualities matter more out here than any fancy teaching certificate. His faith in her was both flattering and intimidating. Sarah changed the subject. Will you be at the school opening tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it, Xavier assured her. Half the town will turn out, I expect. First day of school is quite the event in Eureka. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the ticking of the small clock Sarah had placed on the mantel. It was a domestic scene. Sarah realized the kind that married couples might share at the end of a busy day. The thought brought color to her cheeks. Xavier seemed to sense the shift in her mood. He set down his empty cup and rose to his feet. I should let you get settled. You'll want time to prepare for tomorrow. Yes, of course, Sarah agreed, standing as well. Thank you for all your help today and this past week. My pleasure, he replied, reaching for his hat. He hesitated at the door, turning back to her with an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his expression. Sarah, whatever he intended to say remained unspoken as a knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah opened it to find Emily Wilson bearing a large basket covered with a checkered cloth. Thought you might need some supplies to start you off, Emily announced, bustling in. Just some bread, preserves, eggs, and a bit of ham. Oh, Xavier, I didn't realize you were still here. Something in Emily's tone suggested she found their situation noteworthy. Sarah became acutely aware of how it might appear the two of them alone in her new quarters, Xavier's coat thrown casually over a chair as if he belonged there. Just helping Miss Newbury get settled, Xavier explained, his voice carefully neutral. I was on my way out. Emily hummed, her expression speculative as she set the basket on the kitchen table. Well, don't let me interrupt. Not at all, Xavier assured her, reaching for his coat. Thank you again for starting the fire this morning. It made moving in much more comfortable. Emily beamed at him. Happy to help. We all want our new teacher feeling welcome. She turned to Sarah. Now, I've brought enough to tide you over for a day or two, but you'll want to set up an account at Foster's store for regular supplies. As Emily continued explaining the contents of her basket, Xavier caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Good luck tomorrow," before slipping quietly out the door. Sarah felt an irrational disappointment at his departure and the lost opportunity to hear what he'd been about to say. Emily stayed for nearly an hour, providing Sarah with a thorough orientation to her new home and a comprehensive update on town gossip. By the time she left, the afternoon was waning, and Sarah's thoughts had turned to final preparations for her first day of school. She reviewed her lesson plans one last time, laid out her clothing for the morning, and tried to anticipate every possible scenario the day might bring. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her nervous energy, and she retired to her new bedroom. As she lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her own home, the occasional pop from the stove, the wind in the eaves, the distant howl of a coyote, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 10 days. From abandoned stranger at a depot to established teacher with her own home and growing circle of acquaintances, it seemed almost miraculous. And central to that transformation was Xavier Mackenzie, the man who had sat beside her when no one else came, offering to be her answer. Sarah fell asleep wondering what questions still lay unasked between them. Morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Sarah dressed carefully in a high-necked shirtwaist and her best navy skirt, pinning her hair in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. After a hasty breakfast, she walked the short distance to the schoolhouse, arriving an hour before the appointed opening time. Inside, she checked everything one final time: chalk and erasers by the blackboard, primers stacked neatly on her desk, water bucket filled, and the small pot-bellied stove radiating comfortable warmth throughout the room. Satisfied that all was in readiness, Sarah stood behind her desk, hands clasped to still their slight trembling, and waited. The first family arrived 20 minutes early, a mother with 3 children ranging from about 6 to 12 years of age, all scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best despite it being Monday. "Mrs. Peterson," the woman introduced herself, nudging her children forward. "My husband's the banker. These are our children. Elizabeth is 12, James is 9, and little Margaret just turned 6. Sarah greeted each child warmly, assigning them desks according to age. The Petersons were quickly followed by more families, until the classroom buzzed with the excited voices of children and the murmured conversations of parents. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mayor Hollister appeared at the door, accompanied by several town council members and, to Sarah's pleasure, Xavier. The mayor raised his hands for silence. "Good morning, folks. Today marks an important occasion for Erica, the reopening of our school under the guidance of our new teacher, Miss Sarah Newbury." He gestured for Sarah to join him at the front of the room. "Miss Newbury comes to us highly recommended from Boston, with excellent qualifications and a genuine desire to help shape our children's futures. I know you'll all join me in making her welcome." There was a round of applause, during which Sarah caught Xavier's eye. He gave her an encouraging nod, his quiet confidence bolstering her own. The mayor continued with a brief speech about the importance of education, ending with a flourish. "And so, without further ado, I declare the Erica School officially open." More applause followed as parents began saying goodbye to their children. Xavier approached Sarah while she was greeting Amos Jenkins and his son Tommy. "Everything looks well organized," he commented when the minor had moved away. "How many students?" 18 so far, Sarah replied, surveying the room with satisfaction. Ages 6 to 15. Challenging range, Xavier observed, but not impossible, Sarah countered with growing confidence. I'll need to be creative with my groupings, but it can work. Xavier smiled. I never doubted it. He glanced at the children, now settled at their desks and watching them with undisguised curiosity. I should let you start your day. Will you be at Emily's for dinner? Probably, Sarah confirmed. Though I expect I'll have much to tell you about my first day. I look forward to it, Xavier replied, his eyes warm. Good luck, schoolmarm. The affectionate nickname brought a smile to Sarah's lips as she watched him leave with the other adults. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face her class 18 young faces, each representing a family's hopes for the future. Good morning, children, she began. I'm Miss Newbury, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher. The day unfolded better than Sarah had dared hope. After initial assessments to determine each child's abilities, she organized them into groups for reading, arithmetic, and writing. The older students helped the younger ones during independent work, and all showed an eagerness to learn that made teaching them a joy. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. She stood at the door, bidding each child goodbye, making mental notes about individual strengths and weaknesses to address in future lessons. Tommy Jenkins was the last to leave, lingering by her desk with a small, twisted piece of metal in his hand. Made this for you, Miss Newbury, he said shyly, extending the crude object. It's a flower, from a horseshoe nail. Sarah accepted the gift with genuine pleasure. It's beautiful, Tommy. Thank you. The boy's face lit up. Pa says education's important, says it's what my ma would have wanted for me. He scuffed his boot against the floor. I haven't had much schooling before. Then we'll learn together, Sarah assured him, and I think you'll do very well. After Tommy departed, Sarah sat at her desk, reflecting on the day's successes and challenges. The metal flower sat before her, a simple gift, but one that represented everything she'd hoped to find in coming west. Appreciation for learning, the chance to make a real difference, and the genuine human connections so often missing in Boston society. She was still sitting there when a knock sounded at the open door. Xavier stood in the entrance, hat in hand. Successful first day? He inquired, stepping into the classroom. Sarah rose, unable to contain her smile. Very much so. The children are wonderful, eager to learn, respectful, and so bright. Even those with limited previous education catch on quickly. Frontier children grow up fast, Xavier commented, moving closer. Responsibility comes early out here. I noticed, Sarah agreed. Even the youngest seem more self-sufficient than children of similar ages back east. Xavier gestured to the metal flower on her desk. I see Tommy's taken a shine to you already. You know him well? Sarah asked. Amos works for me part-time when the mining's slow, Xavier explained. Tommy sometimes comes along. Good kid, sharp mind. His mother's passing hit them both hard. Sarah picked up the crude flower, turning it in her fingers. He made this for me, said his father told him education is important. Amos is right, Xavier agreed. Out here, knowing how to read a contract or calculate figures can mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. He smiled slightly. Though I suspect Tommy's gift has more to do with his teacher than his father's wisdom. Sarah felt herself blush. Nonsense. He's simply being kind. He's not the only one who thinks highly of you, Xavier said, his voice dropping to a lower register that sent a pleasant shiver through Sarah. Before she could respond, Xavier gestured to the door. I thought you might like to celebrate your first successful day of school. Emily's made a special dinner. That sounds lovely, Sarah accepted, gathering her shawl and the lesson book where she'd made notes throughout the day. "Though I should warn you, I may talk of nothing but schoolroom matters. It's been quite the day." "I'd like to hear all about it," Xavier assured her, offering his arm as they stepped outside. Sarah locked the schoolhouse door, then placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid warmth of his arm beneath the wool coat. As they walked toward town, she described her students, their varying abilities, and her plans for organizing future lessons. Xavier listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. By the time they reached Emily's cafe, Sarah realized she'd done most of the talking. "I've been monopolizing the conversation," she apologized as they were seated at a table by the window. "Please tell me about your day." Xavier shrugged. "Not much to tell. Checked fence lines in the north pasture, discussed fall breeding plans with Luke, ordered supplies for winter." His lips quirked. "Not nearly as interesting as your 18 pupils." "It sounds perfectly interesting to me," Sarah countered. "I know almost nothing about ranching." For the remainder of their meal, Xavier described ranch operations, the seasonal cycles of breeding and calving, the challenges of moving cattle to market, the constant battle against predators and harsh weather. Sarah found herself fascinated by this glimpse into a world so different from anything she'd known. "You truly love it, don't you?" she observed as they shared Emily's special apple cobbler for dessert. "The land, the animals, all of it." Xavier nodded, his expression softening. "It gets in your blood, the freedom of it, the responsibility, knowing that what you build is truly yours." He met her gaze. "Not so different from how you feel about teaching, I imagine." Sarah was struck by the parallel. "No, not different at all. It's about creating something worthwhile, something that matters." Their eyes held across the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Sarah felt her heart beat faster, aware that their connection had deepened beyond mere friendship. The spell was broken when Emily appeared with coffee. "You two planning to attend the harvest dance Saturday?" she asked, pouring the steaming liquid into their cups. "Dance?" Sarah echoed, momentarily confused. "Annual tradition," Emily explained. "Held in the town hall before winter sets in. Everyone attends music, food, dancing till midnight." Xavier watched Sarah's face. "Would you like to go?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond a simple social invitation. Sarah knew her answer would signal something important to both Xavier and the town. "I'd be delighted," she replied, her voice steadier than her pulse. Xavier's smile was worth whatever gossip might follow. "I'll call for you at 7 on Saturday, then." Emily looked between them, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Wonderful. It's always the event of the season. Now, can I get you anything else?" After declining further refreshments, they finished their coffee and stepped out into the evening air. Stars were appearing in the darkening sky as Xavier walked Sarah back to her quarters beside the schoolhouse. "Thank you for dinner," Sarah said as they reached her door, "and for listening to all my teaching stories." "My pleasure," Xavier replied, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling night. "I'm proud of what you accomplished today, Sarah." The simple statement touched her deeply. Not even her father, supportive as he'd been, had expressed such straightforward pride in her work. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning far more than appreciation for his words. For a moment, it seemed Xavier might close the small distance between them. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes, and Sarah found herself holding her breath in anticipation. Instead, he stepped back slightly. "Good night, Sarah. Sleep well." "Good night, Xav," she replied, unable to hide her disappointment entirely. As she closed the door behind her, Sarah leaned against it, her emotions in turmoil. Professor Hamilton had courted her for months before requesting permission to hold her hand. Yet after less than 2 weeks in Xavier Mackenzie's company, she found herself wishing for far more than propriety allowed. The week passed in a blur of teaching, planning lessons, and gradually settling into her new home and community. Each day brought fresh challenges and satisfactions, as Sarah adjusted her methods to meet her students' varied needs. Tommy Jenkins showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics, while shy Margaret Peterson revealed a gift for storytelling that emerged when Sarah encouraged her to read aloud to younger children. In the evenings, Sarah often dined at Emily's cafe, sometimes alone with her lesson books, sometimes joined by other townspeople eager to discuss their children's progress. Xavier appeared regularly, though not daily, his ranch responsibilities keeping him busy with the approach of autumn. When he did join her, their conversations ranged widely, their comfort with each other growing with each encounter. By Saturday, Sarah found herself anticipating the harvest dance with an excitement that surprised her. She hadn't packed many formal clothes for her journey west, but she had brought one special dress, a deep emerald silk with modest lace trim that complemented her honey-brown hair and hazel eyes. It was perhaps a year out of fashion by Boston standards, but in Eureka, it would be positively elegant. As 7 o'clock approached, Sarah surveyed her appearance in the small mirror above her washstand. The green silk rustled pleasantly as she moved, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual schoolteacher's bun. She had allowed herself one small vanity, a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. A knock at the door sent a flutter of anticipation through her stomach. Taking a deep breath, Sarah crossed the small sitting room and opened the door. Xavier stood on her doorstep, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't find words. He was dressed in formal attire, black suit, crisp white shirt, string tie, his usually unruly dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked like a different man from the dusty cowboy who had first sat beside her at the depot. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes taking in her appearance with unconcealed admiration. "Thank you," Sarah replied, feeling color rise to her cheeks. "You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Mackenzie." A smile tugged at his lips. "Don't get used to it. These fancy clothes only come out for special occasions." He offered his arm, and Sarah took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine woolen suit. The evening air was cool as they walked toward the town hall, their breath making small clouds in the October chill. "I should warn you," Xavier said as they approached the brightly lit building. "Everyone will be watching us." The new schoolteacher and the eligible rancher attending a dance together, its prime gossip material. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened slightly. "Does that concern you?" Xavier glanced down at her, his expression serious. "Only if it makes you uncomfortable." "I'm well past caring what people say about me." "Then we're of the same mind," Sarah assured him, though her heart beat faster at the implication that there was indeed something worth gossiping about between them. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the open space. Tables lined the walls, laden with food brought by every family in town. A small group of musicians, 2 fiddlers, a guitar player, and an elderly man with a harmonica occupied one corner, filling the air with lively tunes. Their entrance caused a brief lull in conversation as heads turned to observe them. Sarah felt dozens of eyes assessing her dress, her hairstyle, and most significantly, her hand resting on Xavier's arm. Then Mayor Hollister boomed a greeting from across the room, and the moment passed as people returned to their conversations. "Miss Newbury, Mackenzie, come join us," called Dr. Burke, beckoning them toward where he stood with his wife and several other couples. The next hour passed pleasantly, as Sarah was introduced to more townspeople, accepted compliments on her teaching, and shared in the community's harvest celebration. Xavier remained at her side, his steady presence both reassuring and distracting. She found herself increasingly aware of his every movement, the brush of his arm against hers, the warmth of his hand at the small of her back, when he guided her through the crowded room. When the musicians struck up a waltz, Xavier turned to her. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked formally, extending his hand. Sarah placed her fingers in his palm. "With pleasure." He led her onto the cleared area serving as a dance floor where several couples were already circling. As his arm encircled her waist and her hand rested on his shoulder, Sarah was acutely conscious of their physical proximity closer than they had ever been before. "I confess I'm surprised," she said as they began to move with the music. "I wouldn't have expected a rancher to waltz so well." Xavier's lips quirked. "My mother insisted on lessons before I left Texas, said a gentleman should know how to dance properly, no matter where life took him." "She was right," Sarah approved, "though I'm curious what other hidden talents might you possess, Mr. Mackenzie." "A few," he replied enigmatically, his blue eyes holding hers as he guided her through a turn. "Perhaps you'll discover them in time." There was a promise in his voice that made Sarah's pulse quicken. As they continued to dance, the room seemed to fade around them, the music and other couples becoming distant and unimportant compared to the man holding her in his arms. "You've changed everything, you know," Xavier said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Since you arrived in Eureka." "The school needed a teacher," Sarah demurred, though she understood he meant something more personal. "Not just the school," he confirmed. "When I saw you sitting alone at that depot, I never expected." He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. Sarah waited, her heart hammering in her chest. "I never expected to meet someone who could make me question whether my life was complete after all," he finally continued. "Someone who would make me look forward to coming into town, who would challenge my thinking, who would make me wonder if there might be room for more than just the ranch in my future." The music was ending, but neither of them seemed to notice, their feet slowing to a stop while other couples continued around them. "Xav," Sarah breathed, unable to formulate a more coherent response to his declaration. The moment was broken by Emily Wilson appearing at their side. "Xavier, Sarah, you simply must try my special harvest punch. I've been saving it for the dance all year." Xavier released Sarah reluctantly, though he kept her hand firmly in his as they followed Emily to the refreshment table. The opportunity for further private conversation was lost, as they were drawn into the community celebration, participating in group dances, sampling the abundant food, and engaging in conversations with townspeople eager to socialize with them both. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the town hall, the celebration still in full swing behind them. The night had grown colder, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. Xavier draped his coat over Sarah's shoulders as they walked back toward her quarters. "Did you enjoy the dance?" he asked, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Very much," she replied honestly. "It's so different from Boston affairs, less formal, more genuine somehow." "Less pretense," Xavier agreed. "Though not less scrutiny, I'm afraid. Every widow and unmarried lady in town was watching us like hawks." Sarah laughed softly. "I noticed. Mrs. Grayson asked me quite directly about my intentions toward our most eligible bachelor." Xavier groaned. "That woman has been trying to match me with her niece for 3 years." "Perhaps you should let her succeed," Sarah suggested lightly, though something tightened in her chest at the thought. Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious. "I have no interest in Mrs. Grayson's niece or any other lady in Eureka." He paused, his eyes holding hers intently. "Except one." Sarah's breath caught. "Is that what you were trying to tell me during the dance?" "Partly," Xavier acknowledged. "But words have never been my strong suit. I'm better with actions." They had reached her door, standing close together in the small pool of light cast by her porch lantern. Sarah was acutely aware of their isolation, the town's festivities now distant enough to provide only the faintest musical backdrop. "What actions did you have in mind?" she asked softly, her heart racing. Xavier stepped closer, one hand rising to gently touch her cheek. "I'd like to court you properly, Sarah Newbury, if you're amenable." The formal request, so unexpected yet so perfectly appropriate, brought a smile to Sarah's lips. "I believe I would be very amenable, Xavier Mackenzie." His answering smile transformed his face, erasing the usual reserve he maintained in public. "May I? That is, would you permit me?" he faltered, suddenly looking more boyish than she'd ever seen him. Sarah saved him from his uncharacteristic hesitation by rising slightly on her toes and pressing a soft, brief kiss to his lips. "Does that answer your question?" she whispered as she drew back. Xavier's eyes had darkened, his expression momentarily stunned before shifting to something much more intense. "Not quite," he murmured, one arm slipping around her waist to draw her closer. "Let me make sure I understand completely." This kiss was different, deeper, longer. A proper first kiss that made Sarah's knees weaken and her heart soar simultaneously. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly, still standing close enough to share warmth in the cold night air. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you at the depot," Xavier admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm glad you waited," Sarah replied, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her fingers. "Some things are worth waiting for." Xavier reluctantly stepped back, though he kept hold of her hands. "I should go before your reputation suffers irreparable damage." "Always the gentleman," Sarah teased gently. "Hardly," Xavier countered, his eyes still dark with restrained desire. "But I do respect you, Sarah. And this town is watching us both carefully." Sarah nodded, understanding his concern. As the schoolteacher, her behavior was under particular scrutiny. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow," Xavier promised. "I'll escort you to church if you'll allow it." "I'd like that," Sarah agreed, reluctantly releasing his hands and reaching for her door key. Xavier waited until she was safely inside before descending the porch steps. "Good night, Sarah. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Xav," she replied, watching through the window as he walked away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. As Sarah prepared for bed, her mind replayed every moment of the evening, the dancing, their conversation, and most vividly, their kiss. In Boston, such rapid progression of a relationship would have been scandalous. Here in Eureka, where life was harder and perhaps therefore more precious, people seemed to recognize and seize happiness when they found it. And Sarah was beginning to believe she had found it, in the most unexpected place, with a cowboy who had sat beside her when she was alone and offered to be her answer. The following weeks brought a gentle rhythm to Sarah's life in Eureka. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings often spent in Xavier's company. True to his word, he courted her properly, escorting her to church on Sundays, joining her for dinner several times a week, bringing small gifts that showed his thoughtfulness. A book of poetry he'd ordered from Sacramento, wildflowers gathered during his rides, a handcrafted wooden box for her desk. Their relationship became common knowledge throughout Eureka, generating approving nods from most quarters. The town seemed to collectively decide that their schoolteacher and their most respected rancher made a suitable match. though Sarah occasionally caught whispers wondering when Mackenzie would finally make an honest woman of her. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and the first dusting of snow on the surrounding mountains. Xavier was busier at the ranch, preparing for winter, while Sarah found herself occupied with planning a Thanksgiving pageant for her students to present to the town. "You've transformed that classroom," Xavier commented one evening as he examined the children's artwork displayed on the schoolhouse walls, drawings of pilgrims and Native Americans, turkey cutouts, and carefully lettered poems about gratitude. "The children have done all the work," Sarah demurred. "I merely provided direction." "Don't underestimate your influence," Xavier countered, turning from the display to face her. "Tommy Jenkins never spoke 3 words together before you came. Now his father says he can't stop talking about history and mathematics at home." Sarah smiled, pleased by the information. "He's exceptionally bright. With the right education, he could become anything he wants: engineer, lawyer, doctor." "That's what you're giving these children," Xavier said softly. "Possibilities they never imagined." His understanding of what motivated her touched Sarah deeply. "That's all I've ever wanted to do," she admitted. "Open doors that might otherwise remain closed to them." Xavier crossed the room to where she stood at her desk, gathering papers after the school day. "You're remarkable, Sarah Newbury," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "The most remarkable woman I've ever known." He leaned down to kiss her, a gesture that had become comfortably familiar over the past weeks, yet never failed to make Sarah's heart beat faster. His arms encircled her waist as hers naturally found their way around his neck, the embrace deepening as they stood alone in the quiet classroom. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, breaking the spell. Xavier reluctantly released her, though he kept her hands in his. "I came to ask if you'd join me for Thanksgiving," he said, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "At the ranch." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Your ranch? But I thought we'd attend the town celebration after the children's pageant." "We will," Xavier assured her. "But I'd like you to come to my home afterward. Meet Luke and the other hands properly. See where I live." He hesitated. "It's important to me that you know that part of my life, too." The invitation felt significant, a step beyond their courtship in town, an introduction to his private domain. "I'd be honored," Sarah accepted. "Though I must warn you, my cooking skills are limited to the basics." Xavier laughed. "No cooking required. Mrs. Carter, our cook, would be mortally offended if anyone else touched her kitchen on Thanksgiving." His expression grew more serious. "I just want you there, Sarah, to see if you could ever imagine yourself." He stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing he was approaching territory they hadn't yet discussed explicitly. "Imagine myself," Sarah prompted gently. Xavier took a deep breath. "Imagine yourself being comfortable there. Someday." He met her gaze directly. "If things between us continue as they have been." Sarah understood what he wasn't quite saying. He was asking, in his careful way, if she could envision a future where his home might become hers. The ranch, so far from town, would mean a different life than the one she was building at the schoolhouse. "I'd like to see your home very much," she replied softly. "And yes, I can imagine being comfortable wherever you are, Xav." Relief and happiness spread across his features. He kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "I'll pick you up after the town celebration then. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." As Xavier departed to attend to business at the general store, Sarah found herself contemplating the implications of his invitation. Their courtship was progressing toward something permanent, something life-changing. The thought was both exhilarating and sobering. Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and clear, the mountain peaks surrounding Eureka glistening with fresh snow. The children's pageant was a resounding success, with even the most reluctant performers rising to the occasion when faced with an audience of proud parents and townspeople. Afterward, the entire community gathered in the town hall for a feast where every family contributed their best dishes. Sarah sat beside Xavier at the long table, accepting compliments on her student's performance while he engaged in good-natured debate with Grayson about cattle prices. Their hands occasionally brushed beneath the table, small private contacts that maintained their connection amid the communal celebration. As the afternoon waned, Xavier leaned close to her ear. "Ready to see the ranch?" Sarah nodded, excitement and nervousness mingling in her stomach. They made their goodbyes, enduring knowing smiles and a few suggestive comments from the older men that Xavier ignored with practiced ease. Outside, his wagon waited, the horses stamping impatiently in the cold. Xavier handed Sarah up to the seat, tucking a thick buffalo robe around her legs before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "It's colder than I expected," Sarah commented as they left the town behind, heading north along the river road. "Winter comes early in the mountains," Xavier replied, guiding the team around a bend. "By next month, we could have snow deep enough to make travel difficult." The countryside opened before them, vast meadows bordered by pine forests, the McCloud River a silver ribbon cutting through the valley. In the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky, their slopes already white with snow. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, taking in the spectacular scenery. "This is all Mackenzie land," Xavier told her, pride evident in his voice. "From that ridge to the river bend." As they traveled farther from town, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories where he'd found a lost calf during a spring blizzard, which meadow produced the best hay, the stand of trees that provided lumber for the ranch buildings. Finally, they crested a small hill, and the ranch headquarters came into view in the valley below. Sarah gasped at the unexpected scale of the operation. A large two-story house dominated the center, with a wide porch wrapping around its front. Nearby stood a substantial barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, all well-maintained and arranged in a logical pattern around a central yard. "You built all this in 10 years?" she asked, amazed. "Started with just the old cabin," Xavier replied, pointing to a small structure now used as a storehouse. "Added the barn first, then the bunkhouse for the hands. The main house is the newest, just finished the second story this past spring." As they approached, men emerged from the bunkhouse and barn, calling greetings. Luke, whom Sarah had met briefly in town, stepped forward to take the horses as Xavier helped her down from the wagon. "Welcome to Mackenzie Ranch, Miss Newbury," Luke said, touching his hat respectfully. "Boss has been talking about bringing you out here for weeks." Xavier shot his foreman a warning look that Luke ignored with a grin. "Mrs. Carter's been baking since dawn," Luke continued. "Threatened to quit if we didn't bring you straight to the house for coffee and pie." "We wouldn't want to upset Mrs. Carter," Sarah replied warmly, liking Luke's straightforward manner. Xavier offered his arm. "Let me show you the house first, then we can make the rounds of the ranch before it gets dark." The main house was even more impressive up close, built of solid timber with a stone foundation, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Inside, Sarah discovered a home that perfectly balanced practicality with comfort. The furnishings were solid and well-crafted, the room spacious and filled with natural light. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main living area, where comfortable chairs and a long sofa created a welcoming gathering space. "Xavier Mackenzie," called a voice from the back of the house. "Is that you finally bringing your teacher lady to visit?" A plump, gray-haired woman with rosy cheeks and bright eyes bustled into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. She stopped short at the sight of Sarah, her expression softening. "Well now, aren't you a pretty thing?" she declared approvingly. "I'm Martha Carter, housekeeper and cook. Been with this stubborn man since he lived in that drafty old cabin." "Sarah Newbury," Sarah replied, offering her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carter. Just Martha, dear. We don't stand on ceremony at the ranch." Her sharp eyes took in Sarah's appearance from head to toe. "Come along to the kitchen. You look like you could use some hot coffee after that cold ride." Xavier caught Sarah's eye with an amused look that suggested resistance was futile, where Martha was concerned. They followed her through a spacious dining room into a large kitchen warmed by a substantial cookstove and filled with delicious aromas. "Sit, sit," Martha instructed, already pouring coffee into earthenware mugs. "The pumpkin pie is still warm from the oven." For the next hour, they sat at the kitchen table while Martha served pie and coffee, regaling Sarah with stories of the ranch's early days. Her obvious affection for Xavier showed in every anecdote, though she didn't spare him from gentle teasing about his stubbornness and workaholic tendencies. "This one would work himself to death if Luke, and I didn't force him to rest occasionally," she informed Sarah, pointing a fork at Xavier. "Maybe now he'll have a better reason to come in for dinner on time." Xavier cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Sarah hasn't seen the rest of the ranch yet, Martha. We should take advantage of the remaining daylight." Martha's knowing smile suggested she understood perfectly what he wasn't saying. "Off with you, then. But be back for supper at 6 sharp. I've made something special." Outside, Xavier led Sarah on a tour of the ranch operations, the barn with its impressive collection of horses, the corrals where new calves were kept close to the house, the workshop where equipment was repaired. Everywhere they went, Sarah noticed the same attention to detail, the same quality of construction, the same pride of ownership that characterized the main house. "You've created something remarkable here," she said as they paused on a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings, now lit from within as darkness gathered around them. "Truly remarkable." Xavier stood close beside her, his arm around her shoulders to ward off the evening chill. "It's been my life for 10 years, he said quietly. "Everything I have, everything I am is tied to this land." Sarah heard the unspoken question in his words. Could she, a Boston-educated woman accustomed to city life, find fulfillment in this remote place? Could she share his vision, his dedication to this particular patch of earth? She turned within the circle of his arm to face him directly. "I can see why you love it so much. It's beautiful, and more than that, it's a reflection of you. Strong, honest, without pretense." Xavier's eyes searched hers in the fading light. "Sarah, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I didn't bring you here just to show you the ranch." "I know," she said softly. He took a deep breath. "I love you, Sarah Newbury. I think I started falling in love with you that first day at the depot. I know it's fast by Eastern standards, but out here we recognize what matters and hold on to it," Sarah finished for him, reaching up to touch his face gently. "I love you too, Xavier." The words, finally spoken aloud, seemed to release something in him. He pulled her closer, kissing her with an intensity that left no doubt of his feelings. Sarah responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she allowed herself to fully embrace the emotions she'd been gradually acknowledging over the past weeks. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not immediately. I know you need time, that there are considerations with the school. But say you'll be my wife, that someday soon this will be our home, not just mine." Sarah's heart felt too full for words. Instead of answering immediately, she kissed him again, trying to convey through that connection everything she was feeling. "Is that a yes?" Xavier asked when they parted, a smile in his voice. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, her own smile radiant in the gathering dusk. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Mackenzie." His whoop of joy echoed across the valley, startling a flock of birds from a nearby tree. Xavier lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and kissing her again more gently. "Martha's going to be insufferable," he said with a laugh. "She's been telling me to stop wasting time since the first day I mentioned your name." "Wise woman," Sarah replied, her happiness bubbling over into laughter. "We shouldn't keep her waiting for supper." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, its windows glowing with welcome in the November twilight. Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of coming home to a place she'd never been before. The path ahead wouldn't be without challenges. She was committed to her students and would need to fulfill her teaching contract, while Xavier had responsibilities that kept him at the ranch most days. But looking up at the man beside her, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that they would find their way forward together. From that first moment at the depot when he'd sat beside her and promised to be her answer, Xavier Mackenzie had been showing her the truth of his character through actions rather than words. Now, with both actions and words aligned in perfect harmony, Sarah embraced the future they would build together, a future neither of them could have imagined when fate brought them together on that dusty platform just a few short months ago. Epilogue: 1 year later, the train whistle pierced the autumn air as the locomotive pulled into Eureka Station, steam billowing around the platform. Sarah Mackenzie stood waiting, her hand resting lightly on her slightly rounded belly, excitement brightening her features as she scanned the disembarking passengers. "There she is," she exclaimed, waving to catch the attention of an elegantly dressed older woman who had just stepped down from the first-class car. Aunt Harriet spotted her, a look of relief crossing her aristocratic features. She made her way toward Sarah, trailed by a porter carrying her substantial luggage. "My dear girl," she greeted Sarah, embracing her with uncharacteristic warmth. "Let me look at you." She stepped back, her critical eye taking in Sarah's simple but well-made dress, the healthy glow of her complexion, and the visible evidence of her condition. "Marriage clearly agrees with you," she pronounced with satisfaction. "It does indeed," Sarah confirmed, linking arms with her aunt as they moved toward the exit. "Xavier sends his apologies for not meeting us. A situation with the herd required his attention, but he'll join us for dinner at the ranch. I'm eager to meet this cowboy who swept my proper niece off her feet," Aunt Harriet remarked, a hint of her old sharpness returning. "Your letters paint quite the picture, but I reserve judgment until I've seen him for myself." Sarah smiled, untroubled by her aunt's skepticism. "You'll adore him, Aunt. Everyone does." Outside, Luke waited with the wagon, tipping his hat politely as Sarah introduced him. "Mrs. Tremaine, welcome to Eureka. Boss said to make sure you had the most comfortable seat." He indicated extra cushions placed on the wagon bench. "How thoughtful," Aunt Harriet murmured, allowing Luke to help her up to the seat. As they drove through town, Sarah pointed out landmarks: the school where she still taught 3 days a week, with a full-time assistant teacher now handling the other days. Emily's cafe, the church where she and Xavier had married the previous spring in a ceremony that had brought together the entire community. "It's smaller than I expected," Aunt Harriet observed, though without the disparagement Sarah had anticipated. "Small but vibrant," Sarah replied. "I've come to love it dearly." Once they left town, Aunt Harriet grew quiet, taking in the majestic landscape with evident appreciation. "I begin to understand your letters better now," she said after a while. This country has a power about it, a grandeur that's quite compelling. Wait until you see the ranch, Sarah told her, excitement creeping into her voice. Xavier has built something truly special there. When they crested the final hill and the ranch spread before them in the valley below, even Aunt Harriet couldn't suppress a gasp of admiration. Good heavens, Sarah, when you wrote of a ranch, I pictured something far more primitive. Sarah laughed. Xavier would be the first to tell you it was primitive when he started, but he's built it into one of the most successful operations in the region. Pride colored her tone as she added, and now we're expanding into breeding horses as well as cattle. As they approached the main house, Martha appeared on the porch, waving a welcome. Behind her, a tall figure emerged from the barn, striding purposefully toward the arriving wagon. Xavier reached them just as Luke brought the horses to a halt. He helped Aunt Harriet down with courteous efficiency before turning to his wife, his face softening as he lifted Sarah carefully to the ground, his hand lingering briefly on her belly. "Welcome home," he said softly, for her ears alone before turning to their guest. "Mrs. Tremaine, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Sarah speaks of you often." Aunt Harriet regarded him with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Mackenzie, I've been most eager to meet the man who persuaded my niece to abandon civilization for this wilderness." Xavier's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "I believe Sarah would tell you she found civilization here, not abandoned it." He offered his arm. "Please come inside. Martha has prepared tea and I'm sure you'd like to rest after your journey." As they walked toward the house, Sarah noticed her aunt's appraising glance taking in Xavier's appearance, not dressed in his Sunday best, but clean and presentable, despite his morning's work. His natural confidence and courtesy seemed to be making an impression, judging by Aunt Harriet's gradually relaxing posture. The interior of the house had changed subtly since Sarah had first seen it a year ago. Feminine touches now softened the masculine practicality curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt thrown over the back of the sofa, vases of late autumn flowers on the tables. Most significant was the new piano in the corner of the living room, Xavier's wedding gift to Sarah, delivered all the way from San Francisco at considerable expense. "You have a lovely home," Aunt Harriet acknowledged, removing her gloves as she settled into the most comfortable chair. "Quite unexpected, I must admit." "Thank you," Xavier replied, standing beside Sarah with his arm lightly around her waist. "We're still making improvements. The nursery will be ready by January." At the mention of the baby, Aunt Harriet's expression softened further. "Sarah writes that you're hoping for a boy." Xavier smiled down at his wife. "A healthy child is all that matters, though I wouldn't object to a son who has his mother's intelligence and determination." "And his father's strength and integrity," Sarah added, returning his smile. Aunt Harriet observed their exchange with a thoughtful expression. Later, after Martha had served tea and Xavier had excused himself to return to his work until dinner, the older woman turned to Sarah with uncharacteristic directness. "You're truly happy here," she stated rather than asked. "Completely," Sarah confirmed, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "I know it's different from the life you expected for me. The life I expected," Aunt Harriet interrupted, "was one where you were valued and cherished, where your considerable talents were appreciated." She gazed around the comfortable room. "It appears you've found exactly that, if not in the setting I anticipated." Relief washed through Sarah. Her aunt's approval had never been necessary for her happiness, but it was welcome nonetheless. "Xavier understands me in a way no one in Boston ever did," she said softly. "He sees who I truly am, not who society expects me to be." "As it should be in a marriage," Aunt Harriet declared with unexpected warmth. Your uncle and I had such an understanding, though few knew it." She reached across to pat Sarah's hand. "I'm glad you found your answer, my dear, even if it came in the form of a California cowboy." Sarah smiled at her aunt's choice of words, remembering that first encounter at the depot. "I will be your answer," Xavier had said, offering assistance to a stranded stranger. He could not have known then how completely he would fulfill that promise, becoming her partner, her lover, her husband, and soon, the father of her child. From that chance meeting had grown a love that continued to deepen with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and shared dreams. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the home they had made together, Newbury Mackenzie knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just an answer, but the answer to questions she hadn't even known to ask. And it had all begun with a dusty cowboy who had sat beside her when no one else came,